listening to the judge who refuses to bend to Trump's will do what's right. A news story written by Terrence McCoy and Marina Diaz and read by an AI-generated voice. Brasilia. The judge had allowed himself a moment to relax. His beloved Corinthians soccer team was playing on television. The game wasn't particularly good, he said, but it was a useful distraction. From the American sanctions against him, the taunts from Elon Musk, and the U.S. tariffs imposed on Brazil by President Donald Trump in direct response to his work. The brief reverie of Federal Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes was not to last. His phone began lighting up with messages. Jair Bolsonaro, the former Brazilian president awaiting trial next month on charges of leading a violent coup plot, appeared to have disobeyed an order by Moraes barring him from social media. The judge took immediate action, unilaterally ordering the country's most popular conservative politician to be placed under house arrest. The court will not allow the defendant to make a fool of it, Moraes wrote in his August 4th decision. The episode, recounted by the judge in an exclusive interview with the Washington Post, was emblematic of Moraes' rules of engagement, which have governed his conduct throughout a career marked by high-stakes battles with powerful politicians and businessmen. Never give in, always escalate. As a young prosecutor, he took on Sao Paulo City Hall in a far-reaching corruption probe. As a justice on Brazil's Federal Supreme Court, he has clashed with Bolsonaro, Musk, and other luminaries of the global right. Now his opponent is none other than the President of the United States. Describing Moraes' prosecution of Bolsonaro as a witch hunt and his campaign against online disinformation as an assault on free speech, Trump has turned the full force of the United States' economic and diplomatic might against Brazil. He's levied a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods. His administration has revoked Moraes' U.S. visa. Late last month, the Treasury Department took the extraordinary step of sanctioning him under the Magnitsky Act, which has traditionally been used against those accused of gross human rights abuses. The judge has not been deterred. There isn't the smallest of possibilities of retreating even 1 millimeter, Moraes told the Post in a rare hour-long interview inside his chambers this month. We'll do what's right. We'll receive the accusation, analyze the evidence, and who should be convicted shall be convicted, and who should be absolved shall be absolved. Empowered by the Supreme Court to investigate digital, verbal, and physical threats against Brazil's democratic order, Moraes has become a national authority unto himself, as well as something of a globally unique figure, a sheriff of democracy. His expansive edicts have reverberated around the world, in societies increasingly polarized by debates over free speech, technology, and the power of the state. He has suspended social media platforms, most notably X, leading Musk to brand him Brazil's Darth Vader. He has ordered the arrest of current and former office holders, and unilaterally removed the governor of Brasilia after thousands of Bolsonaro supporters stormed the capital in 2023. And now, by sending the former president into house arrest and blocking him from social media, he has effectively muzzled one of the world's most recognizable right-wing figures. To understand how Moraes rose from an ordinary middle-class background to become the most powerful jurist in Brazilian history, and for clues about where his prosecutions could lead Latin America's largest democracy, the Post interviewed 12 of Moraes' friends and colleagues past and present, many of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive matters. Most defended Moraes, saying his hardline measures had helped preserve Brazilian democracy at a time when authoritarianism is rising across the globe. But others said he had become too powerful and was guilty of overreach, imperiling the legitimacy of the country's highest court. I'm saddened by the deterioration of the institution, said Marco Aurelio Melo, who retired from the Federal Supreme Court in 2021 after 31 years. History is ruthless, he continued. It settles the score later. Sipping coffee inside his book-lined chambers, Moraes dissented. Brazil had been infected by the disease of autocracy, he said, and it was his job to apply the vaccine. There is no way we will back off from what we must do, he said. I say this with complete tranquility. An extraordinary moment. In early 2019, Dias Toffoli, then the president of the Federal Supreme Court, telephoned Moraes, the most junior member of his court, with an urgent request.
Your butthole.
There was a problem, Toffoli told Moraes, and he might be the one to resolve it, according to people familiar with the conversation. Brazil's institutions, already squeezed by successive corruption probes and political scandals, were reckoning with the rapid political rise of Jair Bolsonaro, an unabashed apologist for the country's former military dictatorship. His campaign had mainstreamed a once fringe segment of the population that favored a return to military rule. His son Eduardo, one of his most high-profile surrogates, had taken aim at Brazil's High Court, saying it could be shut down with 2 soldiers. "What is the Supreme Court anyway?" Eduardo said in 2018. "If you arrest a justice, you think there'll be a popular protest?" Misinformation, threats, and calls to disband the court were suddenly flourishing on social media. The Supreme Court had already upped its security measures, purchasing a fleet of armored vehicles and tear gas guns. But Toffoli wanted to do more. He decided the court and the country needed a shield, an investigation into fake news and anti-democratic rhetoric. And Moraes, who'd spent much of his career in law enforcement, should be the one to wield it, Toffoli later explained. Toffoli declined to comment for this article. Opening the investigation, which Toffoli has called the most difficult decision of his tenure, marked a sharp break with precedent. The court doesn't traditionally have the authority to launch its own investigations, and cases are normally distributed by a lottery system. But his fellow justices concurred, by a vote of 10-1, that the classified probe was vital. "We were completely unprotected. It was an extraordinary moment," said a senior judiciary official. "If the court didn't have an instrument to defend itself, if it was just depending on the police or prosecutors, it was fried." Mello was the lone dissenting voice. "It was an investigation that, in my view, was wrongly initiated," he told the Post. In launching the inquiry, Moraes had a diverse set of tools. Unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, which only adjudicates, Brazil's highest court is empowered to carry out investigations and has the federal police force at its disposal. Moraes could also draw upon a legislative framework that defines freedom of speech more narrowly than in the United States and provides legal protections for the democratic state. "I understand for an American culture it's more difficult to understand the fragility of democracy because there's never been a coup there," said Moraes. But Brazil had years of dictatorship under President Getulio Vargas, another 20 years of military dictatorship, and innumerable coup attempts. When you're much more attacked by a disease, you form tougher antibodies, and you seek out a preventive vaccine. Moraes wasted no time. Within a month, he'd ordered a first batch of social media accounts to be taken offline. Then came a sweeping operation against dozens of Bolsonaro's most vocal supporters, right-wing bloggers, influencers, and politicians, whom he accused of being behind threats against the court and disinformation endangering democracy. The president's own education minister was named a target after he urged the imprisonment of Supreme Court justices. Moraes then ordered the arrest of a sitting congressman who defended the military dictatorship's repressive rule. As Moraes' investigation deepened, so did his power. Brazil's judicial system often groups similar cases together under one judge, and Moraes was soon in charge of virtually every inquiry into alleged attacks on the democratic order by Bolsonaro and his supporters. Then he rose to become president of the Electoral Supreme Court, which operates in parallel to the federal court, and has the power to investigate election-related misconduct and to bar politicians from office. Though many in Brasilia defended his role, some began to feel uncomfortable about the extent of his authority. The investigation was supposed to be limited in time and scope, said one senior judicial official, but it never ended, and no one questions him anymore. Everyone in Brazil now knew about Alexandre de Moraes. Soon the world would know his name too, driving ambition. None of the judge's friends and colleagues expressed surprise at the way he has wielded his newfound power. That was just Moraes, they said. Unyielding, aggressive, and given to displays of raw power. One former Sao Paulo prosecutor who gave Moraes his first clerkship said he seemed driven as a young man to prove something. The son of a modest businessman and teacher, Moraes didn't have a prestigious last name like other clerks. But in his early 20s, the mentor said, Moraes placed first in a very, very, very difficult public ministry exam, beating out more experienced, better-resourced attorneys. He has an incredible capacity for work, the mentor said. He works every weekend. His career as a prosecutor at the state public ministry looked promising. In 1997, he led an investigation into an alleged kickback scheme involving the wholesale purchase of chicken meat at exorbitant prices by the Sao Paulo city government. The scandal, known as Chicken Gate, dominated the news. But Moraes had greater ambitions, and, in 2002, he left the ministry to become the State Justice Secretary of Sao Paulo. "We both came from the middle class. We were never rich," said one longtime friend. "And we'd finally gotten some financial security, so I was shocked that he'd let go of this for a political position that could end in a few months. He said he had to risk it. He always wanted to be on the Supreme Court," another old friend added. Once installed, he made it his crusade to defend the institution, and was quickly pulled into an escalating struggle of ego and will with Bolsonaro. In August 2021, as the president began assailing Brazil's voting system during his campaign for re-election against leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Moraes named Bolsonaro as an investigatory target. After Bolsonaro lost, thousands of his supporters, convinced the election had been stolen, overran Brasília's federal buildings in a riot that recalled the January 6, 2021, storming of the U.S. Capitol. It was Moraes who oversaw the proceedings that barred Bolsonaro from public office. He then took command of the investigation that culminated last year in allegations that Bolsonaro plotted to retain power by military force and assassinate his political rivals, including Lula, Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, and Moraes himself. The judge interviewed key witnesses and was one of the justices who signed off on criminal charges that could put the former president in prison for decades. Bolsonaro, who hasn't granted any interviews since entering house arrest, has denied the charges and says he is a victim of political persecution. "This is a due legal process," Moraes countered. 179 witnesses have already been heard. As his probes multiplied and expanded and pushback mounted online, Moraes took on a wider array of opponents. First came Musk, who last year refused to comply with Moraes' orders to take down accounts on X that the judge said were threatening Brazil's democratic order. In February, he suspended Rumble, a platform popular among conservatives that shares servers with Truth Social, after it resisted takedown orders. The standoffs raised Moraes' global profile and caught the attention of Trump. The president's social media company sued Moraes early this year in federal court in Florida, accusing him of suppressing the free speech rights of users in the United States. "This man is out of control," said Martin DeLuca, the lead counsel for Rumble and Trump Media in the lawsuit against Moraes. Pressed on whether he had too much power, Moraes dismissed the notion. He said his Supreme Court colleagues had reviewed more than 700 of his orders following appeals. "You know how many I've lost?" he asked. The investigation will continue. In the eyes of the American government, Moraes is a global villain. "Judge and jury in an unlawful witch hunt," said Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, "the worldwide face of judicial censorship," in the words of Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau. "The acrimony isn't mutual," Moraes said. On the wood-paneled wall outside his chambers, he'd hung only 3 documents: the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. Moraes said he's always looked for inspiration in the history of American governance, expounding on the works of John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. "Every constitutionalist has a great admiration for the United States," the judge said. He said Brazil and the United States were friends. The widening rift between them, he believed, was temporary, driven by politics and the sort of disinformation he had spent years trying to stifle. He singled out Eduardo Bolsonaro. With financing from his father, the federal congressman has run a rogue diplomatic campaign urging U.S. hostilities against Brazil and sanctions against Moraes. Eduardo, who has called Moraes a gangster in a robe, didn't respond to a request for comment. These false narratives have ended up poisoning the relationship. False narratives supported by disinformation spread by these people on social media, Moraes said. "So what we need to do and what Brazil is doing is clarifying things." Moraes thought for a moment about the loss of personal freedoms, his growing list of enemies, the travel restrictions. "Is this pleasant to go through?" he said. "Of course it's not pleasant." But Brazil was up against powerful forces that wanted to undo democracy, Moraes said, and it was his job to stop them. For as long as there is a necessity, he said, the investigation will continue.